what's the sense now that, you know, after this work that you and others have put in, that you have a suspect? What is the feeling?
Well, I think it's given a lot of closure to the families, because he didn't just, you know, do the rape and move on. He would call some of those rape victims years after the rape, and supposedly through clenched teeth, they have recordings of him. I'm going to kill you, I'm going to kill you. So these women were literally, for the last 30 or 40 years, living in fear that he was going to come back and get them. He wasn't done.
And your feeling about playing a role in this?
No, it makes me feel really good that I was able to do that.
When you see him, when you first saw him, was it on the news like everybody else, and what was the reaction?
Yeah, I watched him on the news. I was actually, and then I watched one of the shows where they were interviewing some of the rape victims, and it was just huge. I gave a presentation earlier this year in Burbank, and I presented some information on the Golden State Killer. And I had one woman come up to me.
This is after he was caught.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, she came up to me, and she's quite literally, she's in tears. She can hardly speak. She's so upset. And she said 2 of her friends had been his victims. And she just kept saying over and over, thank you, thank you, thank you.
What must that be like for you?
Well, obviously it makes me feel very good that I'm able to, you know, give some closure to people, that people who've been afraid for a very long time can now finally relax. This guy is behind bars. He will be going to court. Hopefully he will be getting a long sentence.
When you first saw him, it was on the news, I'm assuming.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
What was your reaction?
I was a little shocked at his appearance and the fact that he was in a wheelchair, because that was so at odds with everything that I knew about him. I had done, you know, an awful lot of reading to try and develop a profile on him, and everything described him as being physically very fit. You know, he was leaping over fences, and he was running, and he was doing all kinds of stuff. I had understood that, you know, while he was under surveillance, that he had been out, obviously, you know, very fit and active, riding his motorcycle, supposedly at 100 miles an hour. And here he is showing up in a wheelchair, and I just thought, that is so pathetic. You know, what is he trying to do here with that? Because presumably he does not need a wheelchair.
You probably, I don't want to put words in your mouth, had an image of the suspect as you're developing this profile. How close was it to what you had imagined?
Oh, not even close. As I said, I mean, all of the descriptions of him were somebody who was very fit, very healthy. And so seeing this person slumped in a wheelchair didn't fit with my mental image of him at all.
So the first time was you saw him in the courtroom, not the mugshot. Because the mugshot doesn't show a wheelchair. I mean, it's just a mugshot. Did you see the mugshot first?
Well, there were a whole bunch of different mugshots. There were different artist renderings of him. I mean, what I do when I'm doing this is I create a little. I have some cardboard, the 3-fold things that you can get, and so I stuff pinned up on there stories from the newspaper, some of the drawings that had been done by, you know, police artists and so on, but none of them were particularly even necessarily looked like one another. So, and I don't think I had a visual image of his face. So I mean, I had no idea what he looked like, just like anybody else.
But when you saw the receding hairline in the face,
well, I just thought, you know, it's really cool that you know, the DNA protected that he would be prematurely bald, and he definitely is. Yeah. And
the eyes.
Well, the eye color, absolutely, yeah.
I'm going to have you walk me through when you first you and Paul individually uploaded the DNA sample, right?
No, it's a snip file. So what we're doing is we're uploading a file that has got somewhere in the neighborhood of around 790,000 what are called SNPs, single nucleotide polymorphisms.
And what's that?
Those are just sites in your DNA And so we've each uploaded those, and then there's an algorithm on the GEDmatch site that then goes around looking for other people that have the same SNPs as the
based on the DNA sample extracted, right?
Correct.
Yep. And then, and initially, how many genetic cousins did it spit out?
I'm not remembering how many it was now, because it's not the total that we're really interested in. We're just interested in how close they are. I think there were probably about 1,000, but I really don't remember for sure.
And then what happened?
Because I really did look for that. Well, then what we're looking for is we're looking to see whether we've got any close matches. And for that we were disappointed because we didn't. We had matches that were out around probably at the best third cousin matches. I think most of them were probably fourth cousin matches. It would have been nice if we'd gotten second cousin matches. So what I said to Paul at that point was, well, we're going to be building a lot of trees. It also suggests that there are probably recent immigrants in this family, because if you've got people whose ancestors have lived here for a long time, you tend to get more matches that are closer matches. If you've got people who have not been in this country for so long, then this is when you typically see these smaller matches. Not always, but sometimes.
So there were 1,000 plus, but really close matches.
It's not the number of matches that we're interested in. It's how close the matches are.
And there weren't a lot of close.
We didn't have close matches. No.
They were what, fourth and fifth cousins?
Yeah, we might have had some thirds, but yeah, the bulk of them are fourth and fifth.
What did you do after that?
We started building trees.
And how do you build trees?
How do we build trees? Well, this is where it was actually very nice working with a team of law enforcement people, because they have access to different databases, obviously, to what I have available to me. So particularly when you're starting out building a tree, when you've only got a name, if you don't have any other information, say the person didn't have a tree posted anywhere, it was much easier for them using their systems to pull up names of relatives so we could get trees started. And
so there wasn't any trees when you...
There were some trees posted, but...
you used that?
Right. And so on some of them, the other thing that you're looking for is you're looking for people who match with other people who are matches. That's what you really want. And I think we had a couple of people that matched each other, but they also were not particularly close matches to each other. So the goal in all of this is to find common ancestors for people who are matches. And so that's disappointing too. It means that we're going to be having to go a long way back in the trees. It would be nice if the common ancestors you're looking for are, say, great-grandparents, which is people who are second cousins. When you're third cousins, you're one more generation. If you've got fourth cousins, it's another generation still.
So you guys were building trees starting in what, February?
Yeah, it would have been about then.
And then you build the trees. What was the big break? I mean, it's time-consuming. You reach out to people based on what information was given to the public site, right? Whether it be email or what happened? What made it? It seemed pretty fast once this happened.
Well, we were able to identify some common ancestors. I mean, one of the things we kept running into was because, in fact, there is part of his ancestry was Italian. Of course, we don't know which side of the tree is which. We're just building trees. And so what kept happening is that we would start building a tree, and so basically half the trees would end up within a couple of generations with people heading back to Italy. And none of us had any expertise in doing Italian research that would have been very difficult for us to do. And so basically half the trees were no good. We couldn't take them more than 2 or 3 generations. So we were then looking for trees where we were basically looking for people who had his, what I would call UK ancestry, who were people who'd been in this country a lot longer, and so we could actually then build further back in these trees. And so doing that, we were able to get some common ancestors. And when you finally have some common ancestors, because you have, what you're doing is you're looking at least two people plus the person that you're trying to identify, you are triangulating with those people. And so For this, then, we were able to identify who the common ancestors were for 2 of the matches. And that they're sharing DNA. They're sharing DNA with D'Angelo. And so because they're sharing DNA, we know they've got a common ancestor. We find the common ancestor. When we do that, we know he has to be a descendant of that common ancestor because they've got shared DNA. And so at that point, you then start building in the other direction. You need to identify all the descendants of that common ancestor. And so you've got a guesstimate as to when he's probably born, based on when he was active, particularly with the rapes. And so we figured that we were looking for somebody born maybe in 1950 or later, or earlier. And so we're building down to that time period. Once we've done that, we then start looking at what are some of the characteristics that we're looking for in this person. A lot of the D'Angelo family, well, we weren't actually looking at the D'Angelos at this point. We were looking at a different branch of the family. So for this other side of the family, then we're looking for people then who live in California. We cut it very broadly. We didn't just look at Northern California. We looked at just California in general. And then what we did at that point is then we're looking at these people. We know, based on the amount of matching DNA that the matches have, there are tables that you can use to estimate how closely somebody is related. So, for example, there's a website called DNA Painter where you can go and you can put in how much matching DNA there is, and it'll give you the options. There are also some tables.
You used that? You used a bunch of tables?
Yes, we used DNA Painter, and then Blaine Bettinger, who's another genealogist. He has some tables that he's put together, collecting information from people on their relatives and how much matching DNA there is. So I usually use his tables. They're available on a site called ISOG, ISOGG.
So you took whatever trees you can, based on the GED match, and start building it by, I don't know, reaching out to. Did you reach out to some of the people?
No.
No, you don't.
No. No, you can just, so you're using public records for the most part. So lots of things for building the trees, depending on what time period you're in. There are census records up to 1940. You look for obituaries. Newspapers are a fabulous source of information. So newspaper articles. So as we're building out the trees, we're collecting information on things like newspaper articles, birth, death, marriage records, all that kind of stuff to get as much information as possible about these families. So we're putting together these trees. Obviously, we're very interested in geography. We're looking for people whose families have at some point migrated to California. So it's just a huge number of different things. And also, of course, we look for trees on other sites. So we're looking for trees on Ancestry.
You can go.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Because there are just thousands and thousands of trees on Ancestry. And so once you have some names, you can go in and you can start searching for trees that have those names in them. Same thing with MyHeritage.
So one name popped up that brought you guys to a second cousin, right?
It wasn't particularly a name. We were actually at that point using relationships. So we had the trees, we'd identified who our common ancestor was. And so we know that D'Angelo has to be somewhere amongst all of us descendants in this tree that we've built. And so what we do then is we take the matches that we have and we try then to make a list of people who are the right relationship. So let's say one of them was a third cousin, one of them was a fourth cousin. We make lists. We then look for who is common to the list for one match and the list for the second match. And then from amongst those people, we then approached a woman, and I didn't do it. Obviously, law enforcement did it. They approached this woman, asked her if she would be willing to test, and she agreed to test. We at this point we have no idea how close we are or how far away we are, and so she turns out to be a second cousin. And not only was she a second cousin, she also had an X chromosome match with D'Angelo, or at least with the sample we had. And so at that point,
X is the mother's side.
X. So when you have a match with a male, he only has one X chromosome, so you know that match has to be on his mother's side. For her, we don't know which side of her tree it is because she's got two X's.
But yeah, guys are XY, so they share a common X. Then it comes from the mother's side, and the mother's side is the British side.
Well, we didn't know that at this point.
Okay.
Once we had her match, then yes, then we knew that line was the maternal line.
Was that key?
It was key in terms of eliminating people from our list of candidates. So we had at that point, when we tested her, I believe we had 9 people on our list.
This was in what month?
This would have been in April.
April, 9 people.
Excuse me, it would have been in March.
March.
Maybe at the beginning of April, around that time period. And so at that point, then I go through, I looked at all of the people in the tree who were meeting our geography and our birth date criteria. And then at that point, and I then look and see which of those could possibly have a maternal match with this woman who was tested. And that took our list down to 6 people.
And then?
And then, part of the profile that I had developed, this was from using DNA. So on the GEDmatch website, there's a little utility that you can use to predict eye color. It's not necessarily 100% accurate, but it's another piece of information. And so I ran that utility, and according to that, he had blue eyes. And so at that point, the law enforcement folks pulled the DMV records for the 6 men that we had on our list, and only one of them had blue eyes. So basically at that point, my job was done. I said, well, in my opinion, it's based on what we have, the person who is the Golden State Killer is Joseph D'Angelo. Of course, they then have to go out and verify whether that's correct or not. And so at that point, law enforcement, unbeknownst to me, I didn't know anything at this point. They then went out and they did trash DNA, as they call it, or what do they call it, discarded DNA. And so they ran that. And then I believe it was the crime lab in Sacramento that did this work. And they at this point, I believe, had put D'Angelo's DNA from one of the crime scenes into CODIS. And so they just run a CODIS comparison. And it's an identical match with the trash DNA. So they know that they have the right person.
Because the CODIS DNA was later, right? I mean, because he wasn't in the CODIS initially.
I don't believe so, no.
Because Paul had to get it from Ventura, and so is it fair to say, you know, when you get these when you upload to GEDmatch, you get all these genetic cousins, and the job of narrowing it down is time consuming.
Oh, absolutely.
Because you're looking at all these people that have some relation to him, but you also have to cross-reference it with suspect age range, geography, who was in California, and obviously it's a male suspect.
Right.
And is there any other thing that you guys are cross-referencing it with?
Well, I mean, the other thing that became obvious while we're doing this is that he must have had Italian ancestry, because we keep running into all these Italian folks in his trees. So suddenly we also think we're looking for somebody who's got maybe one grandparent or maybe a great-grandparent who is Italian.
From GEDmatch, you guys were able to tell blue eyes, Italian ancestry, right?
We didn't get, we got that more from the matches that he was getting. It was telling us that he must have a significant amount of Italian ancestry.
But it was still from GEDmatch. I mean, it's information from those trees that were in GEDmatch.
Well, yeah, it's from the tree information more. It's from who are the people in the trees of his matches?
Because there's trees in there. I mean, they may be sparse, but there's trees.
There are some trees there, yeah.
So, but the Italian ancestry was from trees, and the blue eyes was from the DNA.
Yeah.
But the tree information was from GEDmatch that determined the Italian ancestry.
Some of the trees were from there, but some of them we had gotten from other places. And some of them we had just plain built from scratch, because, as I said, the law enforcement folks, because they have
You kept
they have access to information. So if you were to look in their database and you just give them your name, they have tools that they can go and look up who all your relatives are.
On JetMatch, there's people's names on there, right?
Most of them are actually aliases, but there are.
But if they're aliases, how do you?
There's a site called people.com.
I've seen it.
Where you can put in a name that's not a real name, but just a made-up name. You can then try and find out who that person is, because sometimes people have used it more than one place. There are also sites where you can do reverse lookup on email addresses. So, for example, you can go on Being Verified. They have a lookup where you can put in the email address and sometimes you get information on who owns that.
So JetMatch has either sometimes real names, sometimes aliases.
But they do require a working email address.
Was D'Angelo's name on JetMatch?
Oh no.
Okay.
No.
He wasn't.
He was part of our build down of descendants of
from all the trees you guys were building.
Yes.
Do you attribute it to luck at all, or do you think it really is science?
It's a little bit of both. I mean, we were lucky in the woman who did the target testing. That she gave us so much more information than we could have gotten somebody who was another very distant cousin. We could have gotten somebody who didn't have an X match. We got a lot of information from her match, so that was a piece of luck, yes.
And from then again, you guys got to her because she was in one of the trees, and it was the X chromosome that led you to her.
No, okay. No. The tree is all autosomal DNA.
Okay.
So the trees just have people who are descendants of the common ancestor. So she is another descendant of the common ancestor that we identified.
So I'm a little lost. So how did she come up again? So she was in the tree.
Do you want to put up that one thing where I did the thing?
I remember the mom, the carrier.
Yeah.
I remember that. No, I don't need that, but I'm just trying to see. So of all the women that came up, how do you?
We weren't specifically looking for a woman to test. It's just that we happened to choose a woman. I mean, she was just somebody who is a descendant of the common ancestor that we had, and that she was in the right time frame. I mean, we could, if we would gotten really lucky, it would have been the Golden State Killer, but instead it was somebody who was a second cousin to the Golden State Killer. It could also have been somebody who was maybe a little more distant. When you're building the tree like this, you're not 100% sure where you are as to how accurate stuff is, because we had started with people who were very distant. And so we're doing our best to build out a tree that we think is going to have close relatives in it, but we're not 100% sure.
How did investigators hone in on her, just as a target tester?
Just because she was somebody in the tree that we thought would be a relative, a close relative.
Because of the matches?
Because of the matches. So she's, when
that's based on DNA, right? I mean.
Well, what I do is I run what's called a Kinship report. So the software that I use for that it's a very common genealogy software. It's called Family Tree Maker. And what Family Tree Maker allows you to do is you can run what's called these Kinship reports. So I think that I have one person who's a third cousin. I think the other one is maybe a fourth cousin. So I run this kinship report for that person. So I've got the matches are in my tree that I've built, all right? So I've got the 2 matches in there. So I run this kinship report for the first one.
When you say 2 matches, the 2 strongest matches?
Well, no. These are 2 people who are related to one another. The one of them is one of the stronger matches, but the other one is just somebody else who also matched with that person. We didn't luck out and get 2 strong matches who happened to be related to one another. That didn't work. So these people were somewhat distantly related to one another. I want to say they were maybe they might have been second cousins to each other. I'm not remembering for sure. So I'm taking the first one, I run the kinship report, and I look in that list of so this is all the relatives of that person. And so amongst them then I look for the people who are how I think this person is related to the Golden State Killer. So let's say it's a third cousin. So I make a list of all of the third cousins to this particular match. The second person, let's say she was a fourth cousin, I go in and I do the same thing. I make a kinship report for all of her relatives. I look for all the people who are fourth cousins. I then compare the list of third cousins that I have for the first match to the list of fourth cousins from the second match. I look for names that are common to those two lists. That amongst those people, we then chose people to do target testing. And so this woman happened to be on that list. It suggested that she would be a close relative because she's on both those lists. And I'm not at this point remembering how many people were on both lists.
What information were you guys able to get from her, just because she agreed to testing?
From the target tester? The target tester, we were very fortunate. She happened to be a second cousin match. And so at that point then, I put her in the tree, or she's actually already in the tree. I now can run a kinship report looking for people who are second cousin matched to her, third cousin matched to the other two, and the third cousin and the fourth cousin matched to the other two people. And again, look at common names for now all three reports. And who do I get on that list? Well, actually, what we actually ended up with was the same list of people. And so at this point, I think we had 9 people, or at least 9 men. There were more people on it, but
it's all related somehow.
Absolutely, they're all cousins, yes.
So all 9 people that were on the list, and even I heard there was a suspect that wasn't the right suspect, but he was a cousin of his anyway.
There was somebody else on our list that looked pretty good. I mean, he had we had various things that we were looking for, and he had some of the other characteristics. What he didn't have, he wasn't Italian.
And you, because of the DNA,
we were pretty sure that we needed somebody who was Italian.
And that you knew early on.
Yeah, well, when we started building out the trees and they all kept heading back to Italy, that was a huge clue that we were dealing with somebody who had a significant amount of Italian background.